Hello. Well, we're back at knowe. And last time, you remember, Mrs. Knowe had told Tolly the story of Ferdy, who tried to steal one of the thoroughbred horses a long time ago, and how Festy had appeared and managed to head him off so the horses didn't get stolen. And after that story, Tolly was sent off to bed as usual. So here we go. This is the next bit. There were many things waiting for him in his bedroom now. The chaffinch was curled up and fluffed out on its perch. The not quite ordinary mouse was there to be put under his pillow. There were all the quivering shadows thrown by the nightlight, and now there was a new one. Behind Toby's sword was another, larger, fiercer, man-sized sword hanging on the same nail. The books were on the table. They made mountainous steps on the sloping ceiling. Tolly took the Russian doll and placed that on the table too, beside the nightlight. At once its shadow stood in the room, nearly as big as St. Christopher. There seemed hardly any space left for Tolly himself, so he pushed the doll a little further away from the light till the shadow grew smaller. I don't want it to be any bigger than Linnet, he thought. Linnet wrapped up in a shawl. When the room was comfortably full of shadow doubles of the things he liked, and his own shadow had sat up in bed and stretched a long arm to touch the outstretched nose of the shadow rocking horse, he blew out the candle by his bed and curled up to sleep. Outside, the wind was singing, and soft noises came from the windows that would have been rattling if they had not been cushioned up with snow. Tolly slept, and his dreams were most full. But when he opened his eyes in the morning, he could not remember at all what they'd been. The window panes were covered thickly with frost patterns of forest ferns. He couldn't see the real world at all. The chaffinch was pecking at the glass on the inside, but the window was frozen over. Come, Chaffy, said Tolly, holding out a finger. I'll let you out downstairs. The chaffinch flew to him as if it understood, and they went downstairs together. The other birds were feeding at the open door where Mrs. Knowe stood. Outside, the world was almost magical. It had stopped snowing. The garden looked like the back of a giant swan and curled up to sleep. There was nothing but white slopes, white curves, white rounded softness with bright blue shadows. Nothing had been scraped aside or trodden on. The only footmarks were the birds round the door. The yew trees had disappeared. In their place were white hills with folds and creases in their sides. Tolly picked up a handful of snow and found it was made up of tiny violet stars. He could hardly eat his breakfast for excitement. Can I go out in it? I won't be able to walk without making marks. Mrs. Knowe hesitated. Then she smiled. I won't allow Boggis to sweep or walk round here, she said. I love it so much, quite untouched. But you've never really met deep snow before. You must learn what it is. You can go, darling. You're just the right age. I won't mess it just here, he said. I'll go round by the wall and keep out of sight. He set off, taking huge strides, sinking into the top of his legs at every step, so that the snow was needle cold on his bare knees and thighs. St. Christopher was a snow buttress stuck on the side of the house up to his armpits in a drift. Tolly made slow progress, so slow that with everything recognizable, it was quite hard to know where he was. He looked backwards and saw his own dragging footprints like woos in the snow. In front of him, the world was an unbroken, dazzling cloud of crystal stars, except for the moat, which looked like a strip of night that had somehow sinned and had no stars in it. The water was blue bottle black, with slabs of green ice floating just beneath the surface. Thick snowbanks overhung the edge. Tolly could see them at the far side with snow caves underneath, so he was careful to keep away from the near edge lest he should go through it. Where was anything he knew? Was that hump the position of the green deer, or was it only an ivy bush? Which of these strange shrouded trees had the green squirrel sitting in the drift against its trunk? And what was that on the pathless garden that looked like a giant snowman, eyeless among the slender tree trunks and the soft hills that might cover anything? The smell of the snow made him feel a little dizzy, and the deep silence and the absence of any footprints but his own rather frightened him. He felt like turning round and running for home, but who can run when up to his waist in snow? It was then that he noticed some other footprints beside his own. Along the top of the snow, as if their owner had almost no weight, pointed feet were printed, a little animal that went in long bounds. It had gone towards the snow tent of the yew tree. The footprints disappeared inside the folds of the thick curtain. Tolly followed the trail, feeling ashamed that he could not help leaving such big, ugly marks behind him. He bent down to go in under the tree without shaking the snow off the branches. As he crouched at the entrance, he heard the enchanting notes of a flute near at hand. Inside the high tent-shaped room, with branches for beams and rafters, lit with a shadowless opal light through the snow walls. In the centre, leaning against the bole of the tree, were Toby and Alexander, with Lynette sitting on the dry yew needle carpet at their feet. It was Alexander, of course, who was playing, while a red squirrel ran up and down him, searching in his pockets for nuts. Toby was feeding the deer, the real deer, a beautiful dappled deer with black ears and a white breast. It wagged its tail as like a lamb, as it ate from his hand. Lynette was playing with the lanky hare, making it stand up and dance to the music. With its long ears raised, it was taller than she was as she knelt. Her little dog danced on its hind legs more vigorously than the hare to attract her attention. Tolly was afraid to breathe or even to move, lest they should vanish. But their eyes were all on him, and they smiled. He sat down just where he was, by the snow wall, and said nothing. All kinds of animals were round the children. There was a shallow bowl of milk on the ground from which a hedgehog was drinking. Beside it, a rabbit that had just finished was sitting up wiping its whiskers. Alexander took the flute from his lips just long enough to say, "Keep an eye on the fox. I don't want him to hurt the rabbit." They looked round, and there next to Tolly, sitting up like a dog with the sharpest of sharp looks, was the fox. "He's not so bad," said Toby, "and he's had a piece of meat, but he needs watching." Up in the branches were hosts of birds. A thrush was learning the tune. Whenever Alexander stopped, it tried a solo. Then he would play the notes it wanted, and the bird would repeat them. Robins and blue tits, of course, were everywhere, and field mice running backwards and forwards taking crumbs to their larders. High up in the shadows, looking very haughty, sat the woodpecker. Every now and then it tapped the tree in time to the music, but twice as fast. Toby poured some more milk into the bowl. The hedgehog was contentedly moving off, but a mole was putting its nose up to the milk. "That's Truepenny," said Lynette. "Poor Truepenny, he's blind. Let me have the squirrel, Alexander. I'm tired of Wat. He's too dreamy." "Funny Wat. He reminds me at Cambridge. He's very intelligent, you know." "Oh, he's too well behaved," said Lynette. "He's all Sunday go-to-meeting. He's one of Cromwell's preachies." "Nonsense," said Toby. "Wat is lovely magic. Haven't you ever seen him dancing with his bride in the twilight? He's a cousin to the leprechaun and a distant relation of Feste." Just then there was a harsh noise at the door, like a badly cracked bugle, and a silly face wearing a crown was thrust in, followed by a long, thin neck that never seemed to end. It closed its eyes and opened its beak to repeat the horrid shriek, advancing to draw behind it a gorgeous body and a tail like a coronation cloak. They all laughed. "That's your high society for you, Lynette, the confounded peacock. No more music now. Nothing but shrieks and posturing. We might as well go." And they were gone, like a magic lantern picture when the slide's taken out. A shower of loose snow came down from the branches as all the animals disappeared. Tolly had a feeling as if he'd been dropped into the snow out of the sky. He did not know where he'd been or for how long. He gazed round, noticing again the terrible silence of the snow. There was no sound. His ears ached with the silence. After so much life, there was suddenly nothing, no one but himself. Then he saw there was one other, Truepenny, who was blind and moved uncertainly. He looked bewildered too. Tolly picked him up. He was soft, velvet, and helpless, with pink hands and feet. Poor Truepenny, I wonder where you came from. Can you hear flutes from your tunnel under the grass? You'd better go home again, it's all over. He put the mole down and waited to see it shuffle away into a heap of dead leaves that perhaps hid its hole. He sat for a while looking at the empty, glimmering, magical tent. Had he been dreaming? When at last he crept out again between the snow curtains, the sun was shining, and above the snow, the sky was blue. Somewhere in the garden, a thrush was trying to whistle Alexander's tune. Tolly followed his own footsteps now. Without them, he thought, I feel as if I should get lost. On the way, he looked again at the hump that might perhaps be over the green deer. It had a slightly rumpled look, like a bed when someone is pretending never to have been out of it. Through a thin place in the snow, he recognised the bent brown stem that was the deer's back leg. Tolly tripped and fell full length in the snow. He got up and tripped again, and the snow went into his mouth. He began to feel dreadfully tired, as if this bit of garden had been a great journey. He was glad when he reached the house. Mrs. Oldknowe was waiting for him by the door. When she saw his eyes shining like big lamps, she was very gentle. Sit down, she said. I'll help you get rid of some of this snow. I expect your Wellingtons are quite full. Here, pull. And all up inside your sleeves and trousers, you're packed in snow. Tolly said nothing, but leant against her, and it felt nice. She was real, certain, and understanding. They ate their lunch without talking. It was chicken, and Tolly was very hungry, so they both enjoyed it. Afterwards, he came and leant up against her again because he wanted to talk privately. Granny, he said, isn't it queer? You've seen them all three then today? Yes, under the tree. Well, that's because of the deer. It always goes there when the snow's deep. Tolly did not like to mention the stem leg that he'd seen afterwards sticking out of the snow eiderdown. It puzzled him too much. It's a wonderful snow house, he said. It's like being in heaven and playing in the clouds. And then the confounded peacock came and spoiled everything. It's the silliest thing that ever lived, she said, and stuck up. Was it wearing its crown? Yes, on its stupid little head. On the end of a long, long neck like a hosepipe? All the better for seeing round corners. They both began to laugh, as people do when a silly mood takes them. When they had finished, and Mrs. Oldknowe had wiped the laughter tears from her eyes, she suggested a lesson on the flute. Tolly was willing, but he said, Alexander's got it. How can there be two of it? The one he has now is part of him. This is the one he used to have. It's like a snake skin when the snake sloughs it off. Tolly was displeased with this idea. No, Granny, this is Alexander's flute. It's the real one. I know it's not a flute skin. He put it to his lips, curled them under in a funny smile as she had taught him. And though it was he who blew and moved his fingers, it felt to him as though the stops pulled his fingers to them, and the flute took his breath and played itself. A phrase of rippling notes came out. Toby was ravished. That's what Alexander was playing to the birds, he said. He put it to his lips again, and the flute played it all through. Mrs. Oldknowe listened, and for once she was completely astonished. I think Alexander has given you his flute, she said. I'll teach you all the tunes he played. We'll have some music every day, and you shall sing too. Before tea, Tolly plodded out in Boggis's footsteps to the stable. He looked everywhere for prints of horses' hoofs, but he saw none. He left a lump of sugar, being careful that Boggis should not see, for he couldn't forget Mrs. Old Know's suggestion that it went into the blue tin tea mug. What could I ever do, he wondered, to make Festy come for me? That was, of course, his highest ambition, but he almost despaired of it. After tea, there was another story by the fire. It's about Linnet this time, Mrs. Old Know began. All the stories can't be about Festy. It's about the river again, because the river is a very lively inhabitant here, always to be reckoned with, and there are many stories about it. And tomorrow we'll hear Linnet's story. So until then, bye-bye.